Welcome to Shape of the City. I am Roy Rivera, your host. Automobile accidents are the leading cause of death for American teenagers, making the importance of road safety vital to drivers of all ages. Mark Segerstrom and Laurie Klosterboer from the Nebraska Safety Council have joined me today to talk about how to keep all of us safer on the roads this summer. Good afternoon.
Hi, Ray.
Hello.
Hello, how are you both?
Good.
First of all, Mark, what's your position at the Nebraska Safety Council?
Well, I am the Road Safety Project Coordinator at Nebraska Safety Council. And presently, we have a grant from the Nebraska Department of Roads Highway Safety Office to go out and talk to employers and employees across the state of Nebraska about the alarming rise in distracted driving fatalities.
And what do you emphasize during these presentations?
Well, we focus on, of course, cell phone usage, seatbelt usage, distracted driving, and defensive driving. But one of my other emphases also talking to employers about developing a safe driver program. The Network of Employers for Traffic Safety, along with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and OSHA, have come out with a 10-point safe driver program that they would like to have employers adopt and implement some of those safety measures and training and continuing education with their employees that drive all the time.
That's great, and I am assuming that in those 10 points there's some talk about wearing seatbelts?
Absolutely, and that's just one of the most safe things that we can do every day. Historically, driving is the most dangerous thing that we do each and every day, and in the workplace, it's the number one cause of fatality for employees during the course of their work. So it's the simplest thing that we can do, it's the easiest thing that we can do, and it's the smartest thing that we can do.
And how do we as Nebraskans compare to other states?
Well, that's interesting. Nationally, we just reached a 90% usage rate for seatbelts across the whole country last fall. In the Midwest, because we have a lot of secondary seatbelt laws on the books, the Midwest is a region wears their seatbelts about 85% of the time, and in Nebraska we wear our seatbelts 83% of the time. And part of my grant has me focus on 6 priority counties in Nebraska. Those 6 counties have lower than average seatbelt usage rates. And so those 6 counties average about 71% usage in wearing their seatbelts. Those counties, if you're interested, are Adams, Buffalo, Dodge, Dakota, Platte, and Madison.
That's great. It seems that there's a very big effort behind this grant and these classes that you're giving.
There is, and we really need to get the knowledge out and have people be aware of that. Sometimes I'll approach companies that maybe they don't have a large fleet of vehicles, and so they don't think there's any reason for me to come in and talk to their employees. But again, as people that maybe answer the phones or account executives or assistants, we all drive each and every day, and employers have certain liability associated with us being in a crash, whether we're off the clock or on the clock.
Definitely, and now that we're talking about safety while driving, I've heard terms like collaborative driving or defensive driving. How do you teach defensive driving? What goes into that class?
That's a good question. That is part of my curriculum when I go out and talk to employers and employees about that. Basically, when we think about defensive driving, we're anticipating what we might run into during the course of the day. We want to, already have an idea of those things that could be dangerous. And there's 4 elements out of our control when we leave the house in the morning. Those elements are the weather, the light or time of the day, whether it's glare in the morning or in the afternoon or nighttime driving, the road conditions, and also the traffic that you meet on the road. And for example, in Nebraska, road fatalities occur about 2 to 3 times greater in rural areas than urban areas. And not only do some of these rural counties wear their seatbelts less frequently, but because of road engineering and design, that is a contributing factor to those fatalities. There may not be firm, wide shoulders. There may be soft shoulders or no shoulders at all. There might be larger ditches closer to the road, utility poles, trees, and that all plays into the reason that we see more fatalities in rural areas.
Oh, wow. So, now that we're talking about design, one of the things that I've noticed while driving or using my bicycle is that there's complications while people are driving through roundabouts. Mm-hmm. And with the number of roundabouts increasing in Lincoln, what's the best way to approach a roundabout as a driver or pedestrian or seeing an incoming driver through that roundabout? That's
a great question, because I have that in my presentation and I ask if anybody likes roundabouts and everyone shakes their head no. Basically we had the first modern roundabout in Lincoln installed, or in the state of Nebraska installed in Lincoln, in 2002 on 33rd and Sheridan. Mm-hmm. And the reason roundabouts are safer than a traditional four-way intersection is due to conflict points. In a traditional four-way intersection, there are as many as 30 conflict points where vehicles can come together, and in the majority of those are maybe head-on crashes. And a 30-mile-an-hour head-on crash is no different than falling out of a 3-story building onto a cement floor. So roundabouts reduce those conflict points down to 8, and most of those conflict points then are sideswiped. So the Department of Roads, they performed a study 3 years after they installed the roundabout there on Sheridan, and they found 3 years later that the number of crashes had gone down by 85%. The number of injury crashes had decreased by 95%, and the property damage caused by crashes actually declined by $800,000. That's why in Nebraska we'll be seeing more roundabouts.
That's good to know. A lot of people sometimes ask or make the comment, so it's good to know the reason behind it. Another thing, you mentioned things that we cannot control, but what about the things that we can control, like the own distractions that we create? What can we do about that? What are your suggestions to our viewers?
It's important to be actively engaged in your driving environment when you're out on the road. And it's very easy to slip into an autopilot mode, mm-hmm. where maybe you're thinking about your son or daughter's sports game last night, or what's for dinner tonight, or the argument that you just had with somebody. Basically, all distractions boil down to 3 different kinds. Visual distraction, which is anything that takes your eyes off the road. Manual distraction, which is anything that takes your hands off the steering wheel. Or cognitive distraction, which is anything that takes your mind off the driving and environment. And the visual distraction and the manual distraction, those are generally, when we're driving, easy to understand when we're doing that and not paying attention. If you're grabbing for a French fry or looking at an electronic billboard, you know that you're not engaged in your driving environment. But the cognitive distraction is very dangerous, because that's where you put yourself on autopilot. Mm-hmm. You're thinking about the other activities, you're not fully engaged in your driving environment. When you're having a cell phone conversation and driving, that cell phone conversation becomes your primary task, and driving becomes the secondary task. And when your primary task is that conversation, that's when you look at a red light or a stop sign, but drive right through it, because you don't implant that stop sign as a memory or as a hazard to be able to react to.
Mm-hmm. And that, I find that very interesting, the fact that, because all these 3 things can happen at once, the visual, manual, and mm-hmm. cognitive with a phone call. And we've seen devices come out like the hands-free Bluetooth speaker, or ways in which we kind of allow us to do 2 things at the same time. Is it safer to use a Bluetooth headset than having a phone call on a handheld device?
No, it's not. There's over 30 studies now that show, due to the cognitive distraction, that Bluetooth and wireless devices are no safer than a handheld phone. So we should just stay away from those. There's a researcher, David Strayer, out of the University of Utah, who performed a study along with AAA. And they found that a 2-second voice command to one of these infotainment systems or entertainment systems in your vehicle, that left folks with as much as a 27-second brain fog or cognitive cloud, where you're still thinking about that voice command or that communication that you're having, and again, you're not actively engaged in your driving environment. And if you're traveling 55 miles down the road, that's more than the length of a football field that you've covered in that time, where essentially you're blindfolded because you're still thinking about that command.
That's some of the things that we don't think as drivers, how it affects us. And
yes.
What are the states doing in regards to distractions?
Well, slowly or surely, the states are coming around. With technology, states and the federal government, it always takes a little bit of time to catch up to the new technology that we have. For example, one of the last things that Governor Terry Branstad just did when he left the governor's house in Iowa was to sign some new legislation that makes texting in Iowa a primary offense. And that takes effect in July. Some other states, Colorado has just increased their fine for texting. So they went from a $50 fine to a $300 fine. Now, it's enforcement that is important, I think. And, we need to support our law enforcement officers to enforce the laws that we have on the books. So, we can decrease these distracted driving fatalities.
As your organization helps providing these trainings to the community and, the states by regulating and enforcing, what can we do as drivers to help minimize dangers in the road?
Go ahead, Mark. We both want to jump in there.
We do. We have to do a better job of education and training. And I firmly believe that starts at home with the parents, or in the workplace. When I go out to talk to employers and employees, it's part of the workplace environment. And we have to be vigilant, and we have to constantly reinforce the programs that we have. And as parents, if we can constantly talk to our children about it. If you think about it, state laws are standards, they're minimal standards. So when that young person, 15, 16-year-old, is getting their new permit or their learner's permit, it's easy for maybe parents with a POP to just let their child go out and drive and thinks that the training ends there. But parents have a responsibility to continue to train and educate their children on these issues. And employers, whether you're hiring a new employee and you're working within the 10-point safe driver policy, where you're doing a DMV background check, you're taking them on a conversational drive, you're taking other measures to evaluate their behavior behind the wheel. And that goes for veteran drivers too. Are you still doing a conversational drive with your veteran drivers who have maybe been driving for you for 5 or 10 years and have a clean record? We still need to educate and train our employees and work with our children. Just this weekend, my daughter is home for school this summer. She's 26 years old. And I took the opportunity to have a conversation with her about seatbelts and distractions behind the wheel. So doesn't matter how old your child is, you can still have that conversation.
That sounds great, and really appreciate your your thorough explanation about the program that you're giving to employers. And I feel this is a great time to speak with Laurie and about teen driving. What do you feel are the dangers with teen driving?
Well, just because they're inexperienced behind the road. I mean, the first 2 years of their driving experience is when they're at the highest risk for a crash. And it's because of their immaturity, just their age, and through no fault of theirs, they're inexperienced, they don't have those driving skills. So one of the programs that we provide at the Nebraska Safety Council is we teach teens how to drive behind the wheel. But one of the most important pieces of that is the parent, as Mark is talking about. We need to have parents that are being good role models, not talking on the phone, not texting behind the wheel, making sure that they're wearing their seatbelt, they're obeying the laws. Because really, a child's experience, their observations happen way before they actually start that process of getting their operator's permit.
And what are some resources for parents that have children that are about to get their permit or their driver's license and they're not sure how to start that education?
Well, definitely at the Nebraska Safety Council, and if you go to our website at nesafetycouncil.org, we do have resources for parents that makes it very easy to get to those resources. Certainly at the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services, they've came up with this great little card for parents about the graduated driver licensing law. That's one of the first things we need to make sure that parents understand what the law is, because most parents, when they got their license, they were 16 and they got a full license right away. That changed in 1999. Nebraska passed their graduated driver licensing law. So when a student turns 16, they don't get a full license right away. They get the provisional operator's permit, which has restrictions built into that to allow that teen to get more experience behind the wheel in those higher risk situations. For example, driving at night, that's a high risk time for teens, and so in Nebraska, that law is that midnight to 6 a.m., they're not to be on the road with their provisional operator's permit unless they're coming home from a school activity or coming home from work. There's a passenger restriction for the first 6 months that they have their provisional operator's permit, or POP as we call it, that they only have one passenger. Again, the more people that teen gets in the car when they're driving, the more distractions to that teen. They're inexperienced. So we want to limit that time so that they get used to driving by themselves. That's another restriction.
If a parent wanted to know at the time of choosing the programs, has there been any study about the efficacy of any driver education trainings?
Yes, and in fact, right here in Nebraska, we're so fortunate that the University of Nebraska at Lincoln has done a study of about 150,000 students through 8 years, and research from that study showed that students that go through a certified driver education program had fewer crashes, fewer tickets than the students that did the 50-hour log with the parent. And so we recommend that students go through a certified driver education program. It provides a great foundation for that student to get started. And then after they're done with that program, we tell parents they need practice, 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 and that's with the parent. And a lot of times from our classes, what we will have parents come say to us is, you know, my student is obviously, they must be learning something from your class because they're pointing out all of the mistakes that I'm making when I'm driving. We love to hear that because that's exactly what happens. Parents forget that they pick up bad habits as they drive, and it doesn't hurt for a parent to go back through a refresher defensive driving course as well, because you pick up bad habits as you drive and you get used to that driving behavior. So yes, that's one of the great things that we hear from parents, that they're learning too.
What are other resources or suggestions that you have for parents while talking to their teens about safe driving?
Yeah, we recommend that the parents sit down with the teen and actually put together a written parent-teen contract or agreement about the expectations from the parent for their teen, such as you will wear your seatbelt, no talking on the phone, texting, no, passengers in the car versus one. And then have the teens sign off on that. But also another important piece is, what are the consequences if they are found that they're talking on the phone, or that they're speeding and they get a ticket, that there be consequences. Surveys that have been done with teens and parents, parents are an integral part of this process. Teens that have parents involved and practicing with them and have a teen driving a parent-teen contract, it's shown will be better drivers. So again, it's just that, you know, being involved, having that expectation written down for their teen, and that there's a consequence if something would happen. Maybe the car keys get taken away for a period of time. It makes a difference.
You know, that's great. So now we all know where to go in case we need those resources, and how to deal with dangers in the road and defensive driving. I really appreciate you guys coming in, and wish you a great weekend. And now for our next segment, we're going to learn how healthy eating and convenience stores can go hand in hand.